I'm gonna let him have his 30 seconds till we're live here, but maybe I'll bring him on because he's got a cool background. So I like that. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Matt?
Good.
So how the talk's been going today? It looks like a lot of fun here.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's
Okay,
long, but good times.
cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about JavaFX technology now. Um, I think there's been a lot of interesting movement in this, and particularly with the Java 14 release, you see more momentum because there's already support for Java 14 with Gluon and mobile technologies. So let me share my slides here. Okay, I think it worked. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Java Client and JavaFX technology. And let's start from the beginning of where all this technology came from. So JavaFX actually dates back to 2006 with a platform called Form Follows Function. This was developed by Christopher Oliver, and it was the early stages of JavaFX. It had a scripting language, which was kind of JavaScript-esque. It allowed you to build UIs quickly without worrying about null pointers, complex binding, and came with a cool graphics library, which allowed you to build user interfaces very quickly. For those of you who remember this, it was actually based on Piccolo 2D, which was a zooming user interface framework written on top of Java 2D. And when Sun acquired Cbeyond, they also took this technology and they turned it into what we now know as JavaFX. The 1.0 release of JavaFX happened back in 2008. And this was, I think, a time for JavaFX where it was really coming out for the first time, replacing legacy technologies like Swing. And I was actually doing some UI work at the time with Josh Marinacci, and he recommended to give JavaFX a try for my widget framework. And so I started back on the really, really early days of JavaFX, back in JavaFX 1.0. In 2011, JavaFX 2 came out, and this actually removed the UI language, JavaFX script. So at first, it seemed like a loss not having kind of the visual scripting language and the binding support and a lot of the vision for what Christopher Oliver had for JavaFX. But it actually made it more accessible to a larger body of Java developers. You don't need to learn a new JVM language to use JavaFX. Also, it now gave you a lot more capabilities since it was just a pure Java library. You could use it with other scripting languages and JVM languages. And back in when that change was made, it also a couple years later got bundled together with the Java runtime. So Java SE 7 Update 6 included bundling of JavaFX, so you could use it together with the JDK. And it was finally fully integrated in Java 2014 and Java 8. It was most recently removed from the JDK back in 2018 in JDK 11, and this was a sad moment for all of us big JavaFX fans that it was no longer shipped together with the Java language. Now I have a short clip to share with you guys, but I'm gonna have to switch audio sources just for a sec so you guys can hear this. And you're gonna hear it through my microphone because I couldn't get the audio loop working. All right, so let's see. Hopefully this comes across.
I'll be back.
Okay, so in the famous words of Schwarzenegger, JavaFX technology has made a great resurgence, and now you can use JavaFX technology with builds which are shipped by Gluon. which is a small company founded by Johann Voss, who is also currently the only external OpenJDK contributor. So he's contributing to JavaFX in the open. They've released builds for Java 11, Java 12, Java 13, and now Java 14. They also picked up maintenance of Scene Builder, which is really the best way to get started with JavaFX technology. And we'll talk about this some more, but they do Java on mobile technology. So you can run JavaFX on iOS and also on Android using their technology. And just as a short intersperse for folks watching the talk, you don't need to take any notes or write anything down for this talk, because all the slides are available at this URL, jfrog.com/show-notes. So right before the talk, I posted the full deck of slides there for you. Also, there's a video of this talk, so we'll post the video when it's released. And we're going to do a raffle for 3 Nintendo Switches. So if, like me, you have a couple kids at home who are bored all the time because their schoolwork takes 2 hours and the rest of the time they're looking for things to do and, bugging you while you're trying to do work, the best cure for that is Animal Crossing, which my daughter was playing most of today. So highly recommended that, enter the raffle, but also get your kids Animal Crossing because it's a great way for them to spend time. Actually, speaking of Animal Crossing, there is a conference which is done entirely in Animal Crossing as a virtual conference. I think it's called DevOps Desert Island. Anyway, if you're into DevOps, that's a nice conference to check out. Okay, so I think the best way to get started with learning JavaFX technology is Scene Builder, and I'm going to actually show you guys Scene Builder right now. So this is the UI. You can start with a shell of an application. On the left side here, it gives you a view of all the different controls and containers you can add in. So I already have a master detail view here and some menus added in, but let's add some additional controls into here. We could put a full HTML editor. We could add images into here, and of course we need to choose something wonderful for an image. Let's choose only the finest stuff from our motorcycle tours around Japan. Given the current situation, we can't actually cruise around the world anymore, but we can have nice photos of that. So this gives you an idea of how to mock up a UI really quickly, and you can view it. Since this application is written in JavaFX, you can actually view it right from here. And it's a functional user interface. So this actually is a functioning JavaFX application that lets you test it out. And then you can bring it right into your IDE and continue editing it from there. The way Scene Builder works is it only generates an XML definition of your UI. You can generate the XML. You can also map controller objects. And here's one of the samples from the book, Hello World JavaFX. And same idea. It has a very simple scene graph with some labels, some visual effects. I believe there is like a drop shadow and a bloom effect and some other stuff which is layered on top of this to create nice visuals. So Scene Builder is the quickest way to get started with JavaFX technology and quickly explore what you can do with the technology. There's a bunch of companies which are using JavaFX today to build commercial applications. One example of it is Mint Training and Resource Management, which they do complex user interfaces for doing management of flights and crews. And probably right now they're not getting a whole lot of business, but you can see that you can do really complex UIs with Gantt charts and different visual paradigms, which would be relatively hard to code up in a web user interface. Also, mobile applications. We'll talk a bit more about mobile applications in a bit, but you can build mobile applications for iOS and for Android. It's entirely cross-platform, so it'll run on desktop, it'll run on mobile devices. And from the end user standpoint, that you don't even know that you're running a JavaFX application because it compiles down to native code and it installs like a normal application. So this is the DevOps conference application. Again, very sad that they're not able to run their physical conferences. I think the most recent casualty was DevOps Paris, which had to get, or France, which had to get postponed again. But hopefully they're also able to restart conferences soon. And here's another example, which is a NASA project, the NASA Deep Space Trajectory Explorer. This is an example of a very complex visualization using libraries for calculating paths of projectiles in space. And it's something which would be very hard for you to build in other technologies because you need both an advanced 3D library as well as to take advantage of large Java scientific libraries for the calculations. So the project which did this, Diane is one of the leads, and she was nice enough to both contribute it as a use case and also send us some photos with live examples from the project. So speaking of 3D, let me walk you through some quick examples of how you can do 3D technology in JavaFX. You start with basic shapes, boxes, cylinders, spheres, or meshes. And then on top of the meshes, you do texture mapping to provide a little bit of more realism to simple objects. And this allows you to create fairly complex visuals and scene graphs without a lot of processing or 3D work. And the final bit is you stack lights on top of this. So you can have point lights, ambient lights. You can choose where these exist in 3D space, and this is how you illuminate the 3D scene. So let me give you guys some examples of this. So let's look at how you create some basic objects first. I'm going to make this bigger, if I can get the key binding right. Okay, so here's a simple code example for getting a new sphere, setting the size of the sphere, translating it. A cylinder, same thing, and then also moving it into, so it's not on top of the sphere, and then finally a box. And then putting the sphere, cylinder, and the box into the scene graph, creating some rotation on it. And then this has no lighting, but there's a default ambient light, which is included on this. Let's see if I can run it. Okay, so here is what the scene looks like with the three objects, the sphere, the box, and the cylinder, all in the 3D visual space. So that's a quick example of running something with simple objects. Now, of course, we talked about ideally you want to do some sort of mapping on top of this. So let's look at an example where we map onto a sphere. We're going to define a mesh and do a Mercator mapping onto it. So here's our standard flat Mercator mapping in a JPEG. The code here turns that into an image, then sets it up as a material, and then applies that using a diffuse map to a sphere. Then it adds the sphere to the scene, and in addition, we're setting up some mouse handlers here. So when you click and drag on the sphere, it will change the angle and the orientation of the sphere. Okay, and here we can see the sphere running with the mapping on it, and then you can kind of navigate the globe by dragging left and right, and that changes the rotation of the sphere, which then rotates it with the mapped properties on it. So really easy to create nice visual effects in 3D. Okay, let's look at a more complicated 3D example. So let's do, we can do light demo. to show some of the lighting. So this particular example has 3 different light sources, or 2 different light sources. It has a red light and a blue light, and we can move these lights in space to illuminate a square. So we're adding the lights to the scene, we're adding a square to the screen, and then adding some sliders. When I was talking about binding earlier, the library way of doing this in JavaFX is on any property, there's additional functions to bind. And when you create a bidirectional binding, this will bind the property to both ways. If you update the property, it updates the slider. If you update the slider, it updates the property. So this is a nice way to directly tie together things in your visual scene with UI elements. And if we run this example, you can see we have a square, and then we have a couple lights. So we have a red light. So I'll pull that to the side here. And then we have a blue light. So if only the red light or only the blue lights illuminate it, you can see that that point lights illuminate the squares, the sides of the square, and the other side of the square is black. Now we can hopefully move the blue light to be on top of the red light. So now we're blending colors. So we're blending to create a nice purple shade. And if we get the lights just right, we should be able to pull it out and then illuminate all sides of the cube. There we go. So now I have it kind of like directly in front of the cube, and now we're illuminating all 3 faces of the cube in a nice purple tone. Okay, and let's look at one more 3D example before we move on. Okay, so this is a good example, and I have a slide about this as well. But one of the other things which they did on the NASA Deep Space Trajectory Explorer project is they also created a library called FXYZ, which they use for some more complex 3D calculations. And so this is an example of one of the different library objects they have, which is a spring mesh, and then you can set complex properties like the radius, the pitch, the length, and create more complex visual elements with less coding. So here's an example of a rainbow colored spring mesh. So you can see it's really easy to create complex visual effects with the base Java 3D libraries, JavaFX 3D libraries, and you can do even more complicated examples by using third-party libraries. Okay, so let's talk a bit about packaging your platform, and there's 3 big pieces of advice which I want to give people who maybe have done client development in the past or are currently doing client development, are looking at how you do things today with kind of best practices for rich client applications today. So the first one is when you package your application, a big consideration used to be the size of your application. So folks optimize for having the smallest possible distributable object. But if you look at the growth of the size of applications, and this is an example on iOS of how large applications have gotten, you regularly see applications you download from the store that are 2 gigabytes and larger, even from large companies. So I think in general, the size and storage of devices has been going up. The amount of space your application consumes is less of an issue. And this gives you more packaging capabilities because now you can package not only your application, but you can package the platform that it runs on together with it. So what works but is not recommended is to package your application as a fat jar. This is the smallest possible distribution of your package because it just includes the code. But the problem is that often your users won't have the right version of Java installed, or they'll have issues running it from the command line. And this gives a really bad experience to folks who are trying to use your application. Also, applets are deprecated now. That's been taken out. And WebStart also has been officially deprecated. So really what you'd prefer to do is to use either JLink or JPackage. JLink allows you to link together the Java runtime together with modular applications. So this way you can package your entire application together as one bundle. JPackage was just released in Java 14. This was previously the Java packager, which was part of the JavaFX distribution. They pulled it back into the Java core. And this is really the best way to package up your applications if you're doing it for desktop or for mobile. So give the new JPackage capability a try in Java 14. Also, using technologies like Growl, which I'm sure you've been hearing about since it's getting quite popular via microservice frameworks like Quarkus. You can do native image support and package up your application as a native binary. And another exciting way to package your applications, as I mentioned, WebStart is deprecated, but our friends at Karakun have started up a project to relaunch WebStart as a fully supported distribution. So you can use Open WebStart. It's an open source project. Allows you to do WebStart, and it's being supported by Karakun, which is a great company which has been supporting client Java technologies for a while. So highly recommend checking out that if you require a web distribution. The second best practice when you're talking about how you ship your Java applications is you really want to target mobile first. In a lot of cases, folks think about doing things for their desktop first. But if you look at the utilization of web traffic, over half the web traffic now goes to mobile devices instead of to desktop devices. And often building a mobile interface first is much, much easier than building a desktop user interface and then reducing functionality to make a mobile version of it. So if you're doing a cross-platform desktop and mobile application, it's a lot easier to get started on mobile, build the basic functionality, and then build an expanded version if you want to do it also on tablets for larger screens, and then on desktop for even larger screens. Gluon supports mobile development. So they can do native images from GraalVM. This allows you to publish to iOS applications and also Android applications. They look just like native applications. It gives you all the performance benefits of just-in-time compilation, but with the ahead-of-time compilation that's accomplished through using Graal as a technology. You can do this on OpenJDK 11 or higher, so it's also supported up to OpenJDK 14, which was recently released. There's Gradle and Maven plugins to easily do the development, and then you have IDE supports with plugins for IntelliJ, for Eclipse, and for NetBeans. So there's some great examples of this as well. We have a great book example as well to show how you can quickly spin up a project. And I'm going to show you guys just running it on desktop, but it's very easy to build an application which will work across multiple different screens and allow you to build rich client interfaces. And I think the last kind of best practice when you're building applications today is you really want to be building for the cloud. A great example of this is ETO board, which is a JavaFX application designed for Scrum teams working together. It synchronizes across different sites. It's doing backend synchronization on the cloud. So this is like a best practice architecture for how you want to build applications. So don't just think about building for desktop or building for individual users. Take advantage of REST APIs, take advantage of cloud backends. And we have a great example of this in the book as well, which is a weather application. What this application does is it talks to a backend weather service. So in this case, we're talking to openweathermap.org, calling their weather API, getting back a request, and this allows you to either take advantage of third-party services or have your own REST API operating in the backend. It uses JSON libraries, Jackson, to do the parsing of the library on the data it gets back, and it's fairly simple to get up and running. So I'm gonna run this application and show you guys a quick example of pulling back weather, and we currently have it set for for London, which I think is appropriate since the London Java user group and Simon were kind of instrumental in founding VJUG, and that's where all the talks comes from. So very unusual. It's clear weather in London, so the world is clearly not normal. 5.31 degrees Celsius, and I think it's humidity, 75%. The last one was humidity. What does it say? Yeah, get humidity. So that is relatively high humidity. Maybe it's going to start raining soon. So a really simple example. And then if we wanted to change the city, it's as easy as just updating the code, rerunning the sample, and then you're up and running. Okay, so you can see we have some beautiful mist in Bangalore right now. So really easy to up and running. And the other thing we can do is I have a little Gradle task here to publish this whole application and deploy it to Artifactory. So let's check out our build in the browser. That's clearly not the right UI URL. Okay, so I'm logged in now. Let's check out the build we just deployed. So this is the last build of the weather app. And the other thing which I have here, so it's great for seeing dependencies. So we can see the weather app which we deployed. And you can also see vulnerabilities as well. So this one was scanned by X-ray. And we can see that, unfortunately, I have some security issues in my code base. So I'm depending upon things which I shouldn't be depending upon. So we can see what the exact issue is. So this is the Jackson API I mentioned we're using for JSON parsing in the weather API, and I'm relying upon an older version which allows remote code execution if you're connecting to a bad service, which could send back things. Yeah, so I should probably upgrade my version of Jackson in my demo. Okay, so a quick example of how you can call back to a REST API and also how you can check your binaries as well. So I don't always use binaries, but when I do, sync them with JFrog Artifactory. I want to thank my co-authors, Johan Voss, Jose Pedro, Gail and Paul Anderson, Jim Weaver, all the other folks who helped us out on the book. And we published the definitive guide to modern Java clients of JavaFX. It's a great reference or just a way of getting started with Java technology. Has all the examples I showed you and more. And as I mentioned, we're going to be raffling 3 Nintendo Switches, and you can find all the slides for this talk, as well as we'll eventually post the video on the URL here that you see on screen. So with that, I want to thank you guys for attending the Java Rich Client talk. And if you have any questions that you want to ask me, I'll be in Slack, and I'll be happy to answer the questions in Slack that you guys have. And I hope you guys learned a little bit about deploying Java for mobile technology, how you can use it to develop rich client applications quickly using Scene Builder, which I'd highly recommend as a good starting place. And I hope you guys have a good journey learning about rich client technology.
Thank you, Stephen. By the way, I dig your background. That's pretty cool. It's like some video background that like the lights flicker and everything. It's pretty neat.
Cool. Glad you liked it, Matt.
You're also the first one I've ever heard that calls it iOS instead of iOS. Is that on purpose or?
That's because I'm like one of those geeks who reads things first and then pronunciation sticks.
Right.
So,
I could see that.
Yeah.
So there is a question in Slack. With more remote working, they're wondering if you think laptop and desktop will make a comeback over mobile.
That's a great question. Actually, this is a little aside, but so I have my mobile phone here, and I got so tired of logging in and punching on my mobile phone when I'm sitting next to my computer that I screen share it to my desktop so I can just click on it with a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah, so maybe.
Maybe he has a good point. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for your time and have a great night.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Matt. Thanks for having me here, and enjoy the next talk.